FDR's plan to get us out of the Great Depression? The New Deal. Every president has some kind of like catchphrase for their platform, the political platform. Truman's was called the Fair Deal. Okay, now let's take a look at it. I'm gonna read from a book, and I'm gonna explain the Fair Deal, and then I want you to tell me why people didn't necessarily like some of his programs. Okay? So let me just kind of go through this. The election put the president and the Congress on a collision course. Truman and the New Deal Democrats, in the tradition of FDR, called his domestic program the Fair Deal. You can write this down in a minute. Truman wanted the government to create jobs, build public housing, and end job discrimination against African Americans. And then later on it says the 80th Congress says many of its members opposed Fair Deal efforts. Okay, then it goes on to talk about the Taft-Hartley Act and all these things. So, what I just told you on the Fair Deal, what do you think people were opposed to?
Equality.
Yeah! What's he trying to do? He's trying to make it equal for African Americans. What's going on in 1947-48? Segregation, is it still going strong?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now Jackie Robinson's going to kind of come in and break the color barrier, as they say. He's actually like the first one, I would say, that started the civil rights movement, in my personal opinion, in that time period. But people don't like that. And that's going to make it very difficult for him to win in 48. So what happens is, he runs, and in 1948, it's one of those elections that, remember 1912? Remember with the Bull Moose Party and Teddy Roosevelt, that was like a special election. Then 1896, remember we talked about that with McKinley? Okay, this is another special election. Because, have you guys ever, here, I'll give you an analogy. Have you ever watched like a sporting event? Like, it could be like the Red Wings, or it could be Michigan State versus Michigan, whatever. It's like the final game. And you ever notice that they always make T-shirts ahead of time?
Yeah.
But they always make T-shirts for both sides. Do you know why they do that? Just in case the other team wins. So they want to make sure that, because right after, when are people going to be most likely to buy those shirts? Like right after, when they're all pumped up, right? And so they do the same thing with newspapers. Newspapers are made in the morning. Did you know that? How are they going to get to your door at 7 o'clock if they're not making them at like 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever? So there's the popular vote and there's the electoral college. Which one is the one that matters in the end? The electoral college. Sometimes they don't always match up. Most of the time, they're the same. You know, you win the popular vote, you win the electoral college. In this particular case, they thought that Dewey was the guy that was running against Truman, they thought Dewey won. And they called it too early. This is why they're very careful. 2000, the election of 2000, if we ever get there, we'll talk about that a little bit. But they're very reluctant now to call them too early, because if they make a mistake, then there's heck to pay, if you understand what I mean. So, a very famous picture, which I'll share with you right now. Dewey defeats Truman. This might even be in your book. You can see Truman's really happy there. So the papers were already printed, and here it says Dewey defeats Truman. And so, but that wasn't the case. Truman actually won by, just a little margin. And so he then becomes the president for the next 4 years. Okay? All right. Any questions on that? And Truman is a what? What political affiliation? He's a Democrat. So if you look at it, the Democrats have been in power since when? When did Roosevelt become president? 1932. Okay, so it kind of goes like that. It's ebbs and flows, So you get the Republicans for a while, and then there's the Democrats, and then they get sick of them, and then, you know what I mean? So, okay. Kind of goes like that. All right, now, let's get back to, the beginnings of the Cold War. So you have to kind of know, the reason it's like that is because my old book was set up differently than what you guys have. And yours kind of bounces around too. So let's start from the beginning. Now, we already know, and we'll go over that again in a minute, but we know how Russia came over and took over all those countries. But the people that were fighting for the Axis powers were not just, Italy and Germany and Japan. There were other countries that were involved as well, Iran being one of them. Well, Iran lost. What happens when you lose? Yeah, things happen to you, over there. So, things happen, and sometimes things get taken away, right? And so, Iran is going to be one of those kind of battleground countries that things are going to happen in, all right? In this particular case, after the war is over, the United States and the Soviet Union are both going to occupy Iran. Now, why is this important? As always, they have oil. Why did the Germans, attack at the Battle of the Bulge? They're trying to get fuel. It's their last ditch, right? Can't run a war without fuel. Gotta have, gasoline and whatever. So, both the United States and the Soviet Union are going to occupy Iran. And the United Nations is around at this point also. So, Iran's going to complain to no avail. They're going to do this in the United Nations, and while they're doing this, the Soviets get all upset and they walk out. Because they're kind of leaning towards the United States. So they end up striking a bargain, compromise. And the USSR, which is the Soviet Union, agrees to leave Iran with their troops as long as they can continue to have oil rights in Iran. Does this make sense? So it's going to allow them to go into Iran and pump oil. And a year later, the Iranians renege on that. Do you know what it means to renege? You ever play euchre? No? Okay. Anyway. Well, they took back their promise. Okay? So anyway, the Iranians pulled their oil rights 1 year later. The Soviets are really upset, and they feel cheated. Who do you think they thought was behind them? Not to say that we weren't. The United States. And this is when we start, okay, you know how the United States always will promote somebody in the country and then they get corrupt because they get money and stuff, and then they start doing their own thing and then it comes back to bite us? That's exactly what happened here. Okay, but for a while, Iran is going to be a friend of ours. Okay? And that'll change later, and we'll get to that later, okay? But anyway, this is going to make relations with the United States and the Soviet Union colder. Okay? So the Cold War is, yeah, it heats up sometimes, but what I mean by that, okay. So each one of these events and things that are going to happen are going to make the Cold War, the tensions are going to ramp up, if you understand what I mean. Okay? Questions? All right, now let's flip back to right after the war. And this was right after the war too, but as I was explaining before, the Germans were being pushed back by the Russians. They were pushing them west, back into Germany, and the United States and our allies, the other ones, were pushing them back this way. What was the deal again? What were the Soviets supposed to do with those, what are now called used to be called the Eastern Bloc countries, these countries that the Germans had occupied? They're supposed to retake them and then give it back to them, right? National self-determination, they get to run themselves. And what did the Soviets promise at Yalta?
They will to free elections.
To have free elections. What are free elections?
People get to choose.
To be able to have elections that were run properly. Hey, what happened in the Crimea a couple weeks ago? 97% of the people voted for Russia to take them over? Do you really think? Oh, to join them, my fault. I mean, maybe. Yeah.
Did you know that Russia is raising oil prices for Ukraine?
Natural gas prices.
Natural gas prices.
Ah.
From the plants that are taking.
I did not know that. Did you hear him? He said that Russia is raising oil prices for people in the Ukraine.
Oh.
What is that? Economic sanctions.
Making money.
Right? So that they can get their way. Interesting.
Good business.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay, so anyway, the Russians, the Soviets, take over Eastern Europe, and, they have elections, but they're not free. Okay? They're basically puppets of the Soviets. That's what's going on right now in the Ukraine, okay, and over there. All right, So they take over all these countries, and basically, if you look at, like, if you go all the way down to Georgia in this area, this was part of the Soviet Union, and what they were really trying to do, you guys, was I mean, I don't blame the Russians in a way, because they were trying to create a buffer zone between Western Europe and them, because who kept attacking them? Napoleon, the Germans twice, right? And a lot of people died. So I get it. However, these become satellite nations of Mother Russia. Okay? So if I talk about the Eastern Bloc countries, or the satellite nations of Mother Russia, I'm talking about these countries right here. Okay? Now, Churchill, he's the first one to come out and like hit the nail on the head. All right? He comes out and he says, he makes a speech in '46. He's still prime minister at the time, and he's warning the world of Soviet aggression. Okay? Because they didn't just take that over. They had their eyes on a bunch of other things too. And they're trying to. Communism is a worldwide fight, by the way. They want everybody in the world to be communist. And so he says an iron curtain has descended upon Europe from the Baltic Sea to the Adriatic Sea. And so here's the Baltic Sea and here's the Adriatic Sea. There is this iron curtain that is separating free democracies from, I would say, unfree communist countries. Now, is it really an iron curtain? I mean, we're using our English skills here. What is that? That's a metaphor, right? But if it was an iron curtain, could you go through it? No. And secondly, so there's a border. I mean, there's an armed border, okay? But when you put this iron curtain up, are we trying to keep people out or keep people in?
Both.
Really, in reality, it's keeping people in. Okay? And like I said, we'll go over that later with the Berlin Wall. Berlin Wall is not going to come up until the 1960s. That's, okay? So, there's a definite border there. It's not made out of iron. I'm sure some of it's iron fencing. Okay. Now, this is really crucial that you understand this. So we had to come up with a policy. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about these Russians? Okay? Soviets. Well, we're going to come up, Truman and his administration is going to come up with something called the policy of containment. Okay? Yeah, I'll see that. Okay, so policy of containment. Now, I always like to use my cup in here. Okay, obviously this cup is empty, right? So if I put some water in here and I walked around a little crazy like, what would happen? It'd probably spill, right? If this didn't have these holes in here, I could probably like shake it and do all kinds of things because the water's not going to come out. What am I doing? I'm containing the water. Well, we're going to look at communism like it's a disease. We have to stop the spread of this communism stuff because it's going to disease the whole world. It's going to make it bad. So we have to stop the spread of communism. That's called containment. And there are two branches. There's two branches of the policy of containment. One's called the Truman Doctrine, and the other one's called the Marshall Plan. So, this one, the Truman Doctrine, is more of the, here, let me draw you a picture. What is that?
It's a tank.
That's a tank.
Apparently.
Okay, and this one is the money one. Hey, what does this remind me of, by the way, after World War I? Oh, thank you so much. There's nobody in first hour. The Dawes Plan, right? Don't get them confused. This is World War I. Okay, so we've got the Marshall Plan. So let me explain the Truman Doctrine first. Truman Doctrine, which is part of the policy of containment, the whole purpose is, all right, the Soviets took Eastern Europe, they got it already, let's not let them take any more. Okay? And of course, we're trying to spread democracy. That's good, right? So, Greece, where did democracy start?
It's all a con.
Originally?
Greece.
Greece, right? And if we let Greece fall to communism, that's kind of like a big statement, right? So, communism was spreading. And if we hadn't done anything about it, it would have. So all these countries of Western Europe are destroyed, you know, because of the war and stuff like that, war-torn, and they need help. But the British, they Germans bombed the daylights out of them too. They don't have the money. The only people that came out of this war unscathed, I shouldn't say unscathed, but the United States came out looking better than most, all right? So we're the only ones that have money. So they ask us, hey, listen, you need to go help Greece. And they come up with this policy, and they say, so Truman says to the world, listen, if you're a country and you're possibly going to be taken over by communists or anybody else, a dictator or whatever, and you don't want to be that and you want to be a democracy, we'll help you out. We'll give you money first, and if we have to, we'll give you military aid. And that's called the Truman Doctrine. Okay, so the Truman Doctrine, I would say the Truman Doctrine part of the policy of containment is the military part, and then the other part is called the Marshall Plan. Economic part of the Truman Doctrine, massive aid to Western Europe, and it worked. Okay, so Marshall Plan. Oh, you know what? Here's one example, but it's not a good one. You'll see some of these, I don't know, I guess you could call them propaganda posters. This one's, it doesn't say what, I don't know what, it might, I don't know if it's France or what. It's hard to say. But anyway, this is like, this political propaganda poster for the Marshall Plan. It says, this promotional poster of Marshall Plan advertises inter-European cooperation for a higher living standard. So what they were doing was they were saying to all of the countries of Western Europe, as well as we offered it to those Eastern Bloc countries, including Russia. We said, hey, we'll help you out too. But they said no, of course. And we helped all of the nations of Western Europe, and they bounced back very quickly. They built their economies up, they became democracies, and it's pretty much like it is today. I mean, they bounced back from the war and they recovered. But in communism, it doesn't work that way. They don't reinvest their money into their system. They continually put money into the military, and it bankrupts them. Okay? I mean, they're strong militarily, for the most part. But in the end, that's what actually kind of did them in. So, all right, how does this move? So anyway, that's the policy for containment, Truman Doctrine, and the Marshall Plan. Okay? All right, now, any questions on that? Okay. So I'm going to explain the other one on the board, and you can write the stuff afterwards. All right? And let me leave the light on, I forgot. So, as the Soviets were coming over across these countries, okay, this is Germany. Remember, it's not exactly like this. If the Americans, the British, the French, not necessarily in that order. This is Germany. Oops. All right, this is west, and this is east. Okay, this is what I call free. This is not free. Okay, or it's communist.
Is that supposed to be Europe?
No, it's Germany.
It's a circle.
Okay, it's a circle.
It's pie.
All right, it's Pac-Man. So anyway, you've got Germany, and like I said, the Russians have come over, and this whole area over here is the Eastern Bloc countries. The Russians are going to control this whole pie, except for this, and that. Okay? Now, I want you to think about this. You're Russian. Do you really want an island of freedom in the middle of your communist nation? No. No. Okay. Now, at the time, there was a railroad, and then they have roads going in there, and you could also fly in there as well. Well, they wanted West Berlin. Okay, now West Berlin's a big city. It's like New York. I mean, it's an industrial city. They make a lot of money. I mean, okay, but we're not willing to give it up. The deal was, we get half, you get half, whatever. And they already taken more than they were supposed to. So what they do is, very carefully, if you think about the whole Ukraine thing, right? They blockade the road. And so the supplies going into West Berlin are no longer able to get there. So what are they doing? It's kind of what they're doing with the oil right now with the Ukraine. They're what?
Sanctioning?
What'd you say?
Sanctioning?
They're putting sanctions on them. But in this case, they're doing it because they're trying to starve them out. And they're trying to get us to give up that piece of land. So this becomes known as the Berlin blockade. Okay? Now, the United States and its allies are not going to give West Berlin up. But we also don't want to go into another war like we just had with the Russians. And so they brainstorm, they come up with a diplomatic solution, and the solution is we're going to fly in. That's plain. We're going to fly in supplies to West Berlin 24 hours a day. Every 3 minutes, a plane is going to land and take off, bringing supplies to those people. That is their lifeline for the most part of a year. And then finally, the Soviets say, okay, oh, by the way, that's called the Berlin Airlift. All right? That's going to go about a year. And eventually what happens is the Soviets capitulate, they open up the roads again, and we maintain West Berlin. Okay, yeah.
Was the airlift only used for supplies, or did it move people as well?
Well, it was free, so they could move. Yeah, they could.
But
People
were
could
they,
go
like,
in and out.
taking people out of Berlin?
People could.
Yeah,
They were free to
since
do
it was
whatever they
free.
wanted over there. Oh yeah, for sure. Let me show you real quick just another one of those posters. This one here is an example of the Berlin airlift. So you can see a plane coming in, landing, and these are big planes, carrying tons of supplies, whatever they needed, Can you imagine that? So that was kind of a hairy time. I would say that was the first Cold War conflict. We're never going to go directly against the Soviets. We'll do proxy wars like Korea and stuff like that, Vietnam, but we're not going to directly fight with them. Okay? So, well, yeah, right. Okay, any questions on that? All right. So let's go ahead and bring this back, and we'll talk about the rest here. Actually, I probably smooth that back over. Okay. So that's the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift. Now, because all this stuff's going on, the United States feels a little alone. And against George Washington's advice, the United States is going to create an alliance with, hold on a second. They're going to create an alliance that is going to basically try to give other people part of the responsibility of the Cold War. We don't want to fight it alone. And so we create something called NATO. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, you know what? I can't recall how many countries are in it right now. I think originally there were like 18. But that's one of the reasons that the Russians want to go into Ukraine right away, because the Ukraine wanted to become part of NATO. They didn't want NATO right next to them. So, anyway, we create an alliance system, and it's basically all of the Western countries of Europe that were free, and the United States. And here's the deal. It's just like when World War I started. If you get attacked, all your brothers in the alliance are going to come to your assistance. So if we get attacked, they come to our assistance. If they get attacked, we come to their assistance. So you can see how a possible World War III could happen in the future. We hope it doesn't. But that's called NATO. Now, in 1955, which we'll tell you later, the Soviets are going to come out with their own alliance system that's going to counteract NATO. Of course, everybody has to be forced to be in it, right? It's all those countries and Russia, and maybe even a couple other ones. It's called the Warsaw Pact. So you might want to write that down. I don't have it on these notes, but it's called the Warsaw Pact. Where's Warsaw?
Poland.
Yeah, it's Poland's capital city. Okay. All right. In 1949, China is going to become communist. So in China, there's going to be two guys that are fighting for power there. Now we're backing the nationalist leader. His name was Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, I guess I can erase this. You guys good here?
Yeah.
Okay. So Chiang Kai-shek was the nationalist leader, and the communist leader.
Mouse dog.
Okay, so he was the nationalist. I'll just put national. Sorry. Yeah, I can't read no like national. Okay, and you've got Mao Zedong. Let's see, Mao, M-A-O or M-A-O? M-A-O. Oops. Okay, Mao Zedong, and he's going to be your communist leader. Okay. This guy, you know, was pretty good in the beginning. Just like always, we give him a bunch of money, and he becomes what?
It's crazy.
He becomes corrupt. And make a long story short, he starts doing some things that he should not have done. And the people, and Mao Zedong's like, look, we're going to make everybody equal. I'm going to like just redistribute the land. So now these rich people are just going to own the land. We're all going to own the land now. And it was a good deal. I mean, wouldn't you? If I was a peasant in China, I would say, yeah, sign me up. Well, they did, and they end up electing him. He ends up abdicating or fleeing to
Taiwan.
well, it was called Formosa. So he goes to Formosa. Oh, pause. Okay, here's Formosa. So he goes there and he's claiming that the elections were not accurate, that he's still the leader of China, and he goes to Formosa, which we now call Taiwan, and that's why there's an issue. Okay, there's another issue. Didn't I tell you about that the other day? Didn't I? Okay, I'll tell you in a minute. He flees there, and technically the Chinese government is now running. That's where they are. But all of China is taken over by the communists, and that still maintains. It's still how it is today. China still thinks that Taiwan is part of China. The Taiwanese do not want to go back. Who is Taiwan's major ally? The United States. So they would have taken over that a long time ago if it wasn't for us being their ally. How about Israel? Israel would have been taken over a long time ago if it wasn't for the United States being their ally. So we protect our allies. And that's one of the reasons that some countries have not been taken over. Okay? So anyway, so Chiang Kai-shek, like I said, he like abdicates or whatever you want to call it, flees, takes the government to Formosa, and that ends up becoming Taiwan. They don't get along. You know, the other day we were talking about Korea, how they were doing the war games, and they were like, and then some of the bullets or whatever hit like Korea, and they shot back. That's what starts wars, by the way. The Chinese will do, they'll do war games, and they'll shoot rockets, like near Taiwan and over Taiwan. Yeah, it's pretty scary. Okay, we're done for today, but I just want to mention if you know, it's our regular class, I'd show you part of the movie. There's a movie called 7 Years in Tibet. Brad Pitt is the like the main actor. He goes to Tibet. He's actually a Nazi. He goes to Tibet. I mean, I don't know if he was a killer, you know, he killed people or whatever, but he goes there. He's like a climber because the Himalayas are there. And he ends up befriending the Dalai Lama, and then the movie shows the Chinese taking over the Tibetans. It's a really, really good movie. You guys will probably be bored to death and want to turn it or fall asleep. But it's a really good movie if you ever want to see kind of how these communist countries take over really peaceful people. Any questions? Okay, that's it for today.
What was Taiwan called?